ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you please to stand for the Mayor of the City of Parramatta and conduct your thing.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I'd like to introduce Captain Michelle Miles from the Salvation Army for opening service tonight.
Let's pray. Father, thank you, and I praise you for a country that we can come together and have a democracy and make decisions. But these people were elected, and I just pray right now for wisdom, for calm, and just that they make the right decisions for their community. Amen.
Thank you. Before proceeding, I'd like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on tonight and pay our respects to the past and present. Also advise everyone that the meeting is being recorded audio visually and will be available on the Council's website later next week. Thank you. Declare the meeting open and note apologies for Alderman Douse and time and Alderman Converse on leave. Item 2, confirmation of minutes of the 5th of February is circulated and is taken as read and confirmed. Alderman Tom, second Alderman Spears. I'd like to advise that the Local Government Board has advertised last Saturday that they are now taking submissions in regard to the possible merger. He's preparing a submission for us to consider in the workshops. The submissions have to be in by the 6th of April. Council knows the workshops conducted on 13th and 19th February and the virtual service. Questions of interest of Alderman or close associate? None. Item 6, tabling of petitions. First one on the agenda are any petitions from the floor. Item 7, public questions on and no matters on notice. Are there any questions from members of the public group? Questions from outside bodies. Some Tasmanian Council Authority and the second quarter report attendance.
Is that for?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Great pleasure in recommending to Council the report. And can I say that the Richmond Park track to the Brinktop Reserve was a successful outing, as you attended, and also Alderman McFarlane and a number of interested residents. So we ticked that one off. And the next one will be the Coastal Trail from Lauderdale up to the turn and back. And we expect that to be officially opened in April this year.
Any questions on the present?
Indeed, just following on from Alderman James, I'd draw people's attention that in moving this, there is on page 21, looking at design and investigation work in process. Mr Mayor, the Clarence Foreshore Trail, Simmons Park to Anzac Park. This will be coming up in budgeting, but it's important, I think, to highlight this in a public open meeting, just how important that is, especially with the two aged care facilities close by, and the difficulties of navigation, particularly around the rowing shed area as well. So I hope when that's seen, that's not seen as a trinket or a bauble for the bicycle committee. It should be seen in the whole proximity of the municipality and the use and enjoyment for all and sundry.
Thanks, Alderman. That's all the questions. All those in favour?
I have the Business East Board of Management minutes for 12th of December.
I have the minutes of the monthly meeting for the Bellerive Community Arts Centre.
Thank you, Mayor. I have the minutes for the strengthening activities sent out for February, but also, Mayor, I'd just like to raise two things. Beltana Park was brought up at the meeting, and I'll have more to say on this at a later motion. And also, Mayor, can I just ask the General Manager one thing? This was brought up at the meeting, and no one seems to know how this happened. We had a group of, I suppose, electoral office people come in and say they want to council and say, can we use that booth?
Very common practice, and I'd like to focus on those pieces of music.
A bit of a surprise.
Right, Alderman Jones.
Yes, Mr Mayor, the Traxton Trails Advisory Committee minutes of the 14th of December 2017.
The reports, we'll move on to the reports and officers. Point 1 of the information contained in the weekly briefing reports for 5th, 12th and 19th of February.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On page 80 of the 12th of February 2018, there is reference to the development application at 40 and 40A Kangaroo Drive, Lockley versus Clarence City Council and Circa Morris none. My question through you, Mr Mayor, to the General Manager. Mr General Manager, does this matter that has now been recognised by the tribunal, in as much as Mr Lockley did raise this matter and the permit has been varied to include his changes or suggestions. My question through you to the General Manager is are these conditions that have been incorporated in the planning permit, are these standard conditions which would normally be included in any permit, or are these examples of exceptional circumstances why the tribunal has now included the proposed hours of work, proposed hours of construction not exceeding acceptable guidelines? Perhaps, Mr Mayor, through you, the General Manager could answer that as to why Mr Lockley has been successful in getting these included in the permit.
I'll certainly invite him to.
Through Mr Mayor, they were simply conditions of, additional conditions to attach to the permit that were negotiated between the objector and the proponent of the development. They agreed on that, submitted them to the tribunal, and the tribunal accepted them and incorporated them into the permit.
That's not the point.
Question, Mr Mayor, are these standard conditions that would normally appear in any other development application, or is it in this circumstance these are exceptional circumstances?
Well, they're negotiated, they're not standard conditions that would appear criteria in most permits. They are negotiated conditions in addition to what would normally be standard conditions.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll put the motion in the Item number 2 is no determination petitions. This meeting is considered. So now I would advise that Council intends to assist the Planning Authority under the Land Planning Approvals Act. Moving on to the first item there, item 1, which is development application of one sample placed in Sandwood.
I think the officer's recommendation with the conditions that are imposed make good sense and should be submitted.
So Mr Mayor, it's a large block. The representation issues all seem to have been covered.
Then 3.2 is development application of 36 losses for a fairway to 2 non-conformance. From 52nd Alderman Sherwood.
And again, same Mr Mayor, that it's an appropriate infill in a very desirable residential area.
Mr Mayor, in relation to the provision of the additional access, all of those requirements for conditioning the second access are acceptable and have been deemed suitable by the traffic engineer. There's no additional safety risk, there is no problem with visibility. So whilst it's not always the case to have a second access, this has been quite acceptable.
Other speakers? Mr. Ryder prior to information for approval, so that conclusions and rights all over. Application of 39 South Arm Road, Blackheath for a change of use to the manufacturing process.
Mr Mayor, this is a win-win, I believe, not only for the applicant but also for the residents in Drury Point Road. The question arises here as to whether or not the conditions in this recommendation include a couple of matters that were listed for consideration in an earlier application for the warehouse extension which abuts the properties of number 3, 5 and 7 Drury Point Road. That didn't proceed, the actual warehouse, and there was 2 matters in that application that were basically put on hold because the application didn't proceed and therefore those matters were in abeyance. In this particular application, and I will seek Mr Lovell's confirmation of this, and that is that Mr Lovell, those 2 matters that were outstanding with the original application regarding drainage and the sealed driveway at the butts, the properties of 3, 5 and 7, have they been locked into this particular recommendation? And what measures does Council have at its disposal to make sure that those conditions are met?
Condition 3 requires the submission of engineering designs of the car parking area, which include the design not only for the multiple ceiling but also the drainage. So those things have been covered off, and Council Normal Enforcement has required. In completion of the issue, we also ensure these matters
In relation to the provision of car parking, it actually results in adequate car parking because the 22 car parks are going to be developed, and also too there could well be a reduction in demand for car parking because the use is going from 3 tenancies in the warehouse to one company as a glass manufacturing company. So presumably there would perhaps be less demand on that side, but there is more than adequate provision for car parking, which has been an issue, obviously a major issue, but
Or is the development application of 3 Lucas Street now to non-compliance?
So, Mr Mayor, the same principle as Dossiter Street, Dossiter Street application, appropriate infill housing, and it's probably going to become more common.
Don't take on to the second by all
based on the fact that this was previously an education facility, a primary school, and it's sat unused since that time. It's been closed, and there is a huge demand for childcare in our communities. This is an appropriate use, and the surrounding context is fine in relation to the provision of this in the area.
Hey, Mayor, look, one thing I do find rather strange on page 99, acceptable solution extracts hours of operation. Hours of operation must be within 8 to 6 except for the office and administration tasks for visitors. But it's got here proposed as not comply with proposed hours, but really, for a childcare centre, you're going to have 8 to 6 unless you give them some discretion. To me, 8's far too late for a lot of mums because they start work early. I just couldn't understand that why it's there. And a lot of people do not finish to 6. So to have the operations must be within 8 to 6, I thought, well, that's rather restrictive on any childcare facility. Now, I know it's proposed 6:30am to 6:30pm, which to me is very realistic.
Mr Mayor, I think just to defend our planning scheme, I think the reason why that acceptable solution is there is that this is for designed for business uses generally, and there are some exceptions where it won't be convenient for a business to operate within 8 to 6, and that's why we have performance criteria to deal with what the amenity issues are around that. It's like the conversation we had around the Kangaroo Bay development when it was pointed out that some acceptable solutions are unnecessarily restrictive to make sure that the performance criteria come into play as it does in this case.
In relation to the hours of operation, there has been, the applicant has indicated that children will not be outside playing in the outside area until after 8am, and that is to ensure that the residential amenity is not compromised in any way. The noise can also be generated by commercial trucks on site, and their movements have been restricted as well. And access to the outdoor play areas is quite compatible with the backyards and backing onto backyards of residences, where which are also compromised by noise from the highway. So there is quite a lot of noise happening in that area anyway. But as I said, the outdoor play areas are to be restricted until after 8 a.m.
So the motion is for approval, so this is conditions of class. All those in favour? Voted unanimously. Did 3.6 is a subdivision application at 74 Sugarloaf Road and 16 Marlow Street, Bristol Drive, for a 7-mile subdivision.
Yes, look, indeed. You can look through the designs and see that the final outcome that's been arranged is a very smart and strategic use of the land. It's straightforward. It's worth proceeding. I think the ancillary benefits to the neighbouring community are quite substantial as well, and this infill continuing in this area here is quite a good thing. So seek my fellow aldermanic support.
Okay.
Get some clarification through you from Mr. Lovell. The public open space, where it says delete 5% and replace with 0.68, I mean, public open space is a contentious issue. Could you explain exactly what that means so that it doesn't look as though we're just replacing 5% with 0.68, which we are?
There is a contribution made as land.
Yep.
And that's less than 5%, so it's made up for by financial.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Right. Any other speakers? Must be any subject to conditions of class. All those in favour? And I'm not repeating myself this time. 11.3.7 subdivision application, 74 Sugarloaf Road. It's an alternative application. Therefore, we can second or refusing. Speakers? Welcome to application 201 Kennedy Drive for transport depot.
No. Fine.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I mentioned this at our briefing on Friday, and that is in relation to the landscaping on those number of properties along Kennedy Drive. So my question through you to Mr Lovell. Mr Lovell, there are a number of businesses that have not followed the rules as far as providing landscaping. If or should this be endorsed by council to have that landscaping, what follows suit to bring the others in line?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, all of the development zones along that road have landscaping requirements on the plan. Most have complied, but some haven't. And
Service items, moving on to asset management.
I would like to move the motion as listed on the agenda with regarding to the Roaches Beach access point at the head of the canal as listed in the agenda.
Second, Alderman Campbell.
Thank you, Alderman Campbell. Look, this has been a long and drawn-out process, and mistakes have been made on the way. There's no doubt about that. And what's going to occur if this motion is passed, and hopefully the GM will follow very smartly in relation to number B in the
He always does.
I'm just reinforcing this because, you know, time is a factor here, Mr Mayor, in relation to whether or not we get Crown Land Services to provide the necessary approval for this to go ahead. And if it's going to be dragged out, then obviously we can't do the work until we get the approval. And that's why I'm basically trying to make sure that and I'm sure the GM, Mr Mayor, will expedite the matter in order to get a tick in the box, and hopefully Crown Land will approve this as soon as possible. The recommendation opens up the canal in its original location, with the exception of the height that has been incorporated within the dune complex as per the officer's report.
Just to clarify, it's not opening the canal there, this is the
Well, it's in the same location,
it's providing access to the beach.
in that same location, but there is an impediment, there is an obstacle that actually prevents, as some would say, the inflow of water from the sea into that area. So in a nutshell, this recommendation is option 2, and that has been regarded as being one of the successful contributions from the public in relation to the location in which the canal ought to be opened with that obstacle as we talked about a moment ago. It is also important to note that the wooden construction or the structure that is being built and is currently there will be dismantled, and some of that timber will not be able to be used for any purposes because of the way it had been constructed with the bolts and so forth and been weakened in the actual structure. However, some of the steel work can be recycled, is my understanding. Let's get on with the job. Let's hope that the approval from Crown Land Services will be forthcoming, and that by November, December of 2018 we can have the people reversing their boats or walking and tiptoeing over the mound down to the beach and basically utilising with some changes to what there was before. I see council support.
I think this actually represents a bit of a win-win in the sense that council acting upon professional advice sought to rectify the vulnerability of this particular area as an access to the beach. Then there was a public outcry in relation to that closure, and council has actually listened to the community and found a way to actually appease the protest by actually reconstructing in the area, in the same site, but actually raising the level so it can deal with the fact that it was previously reasonably considered one of the most vulnerable sites there. So I think the community should be quite happy with this. I agree with Alderman James in the sense that the state government doesn't need to hold this up too much, and that if we can get them on board, we'll be able to get this constructed again.
Yeah, I agree. Frederick Henry Bay is a magnificent waterway with much of its coastline in our city and our municipality of Clarence. It's a haven for recreational boating, kayaking, canoeing and swimming, and to deny boating or other watercraft users access from Lauderdale is simply not appropriate. The next public access is Dodgers Ferry, apart from Pike Bay, which is problematic, so I would seek council support for this as well.
Yeah, I've heard some negative comments here, but let's be honest, when we first did some work there, we did it to protect houses because we knew that those houses could easily be inundated. I went to a public meeting and it made me laugh actually because I'm told we're trying to protect our roads. No, we wasn't. We were trying to protect houses. And I think, like others around this table, we've got a win-win situation here because it's in a good position, and also though because of its elevation, it does give some protection there from the area around it. So I really think that it's really a good outcome for everybody.
I agree that once we pass this motion, as it appears we are about to, the outcome is a good one. But I must say I think some of the communication with the residents in the area that's led up to this decision did leave a bit to be desired. The residents were surprised that the ramp disappeared following the initial consultation, and I don't think it was clear to them that was what was going to happen. I think we could also have put a bit more work into communicating the importance of restoring the dunes all the way along to 3 metres. Is it 3 metres AHD? Or anyway, that 3 metre level has been questioned by a number of people in the Lauderdale community. I think it's important for them to understand why it needs to be maintained along the entire beach. And as the reports from the consultants have explained to us, if there is a storm surge event and any of those dunes are at a lower point, then there could be inundation behind the dunes, which then spreads out and can then inundate houses. A number of people have sort of asked, well, what about the Ralphs Bay side of the canal? And the difference with the Ralphs Bay side is that, well, first of all, it's a state road, so it's state government responsibility anyway. But it's not it may be impacted by sea level rises just like the Roaches Beach side. But what the big threat is the cumulative effect of the swell, the storm surge, and the sea level rise. There's a number of different effects that when you get a storm event, they all sort of come together in one go, and they add up. But I did want to ask a question on this. I noticed in 216 of the Associated Report talked about the possibility of some temporary access over summer. Is that something that is able to be progressed before the beach access is restored, or is that and is it, what is the progress with that?
For instance, now I've had no expression of interest in the workshop in terms of council proceeding with that. There's been no approval.
A follow-up question to that, Mr. Mayor. So, if that is something council chose to pursue, I'm not, making an argument about the desirability of that, but if it was, how quickly could it be established compared to, when the access might be restored?
I think to some extent it depends on.
For example, you have to go through the same process, and then you still need approval for the at the water on for the same material description.
built there and then pulled up and reused, but there may be no differences in terms of timing.
I guess, yeah, I suppose Crown Land approval seems to be the big unknown in the whole timing issue, and yeah, if it's going to go through the same process and take the same time, then it sounds like it's not worth pursuing. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps not the council as a decision-making authority's greatest hour, but I will be supporting the motion, and there's plenty of learnings from this experience. It's not so much a case of us dealing with the cards playing with the cards that we were dealt, but more a case of us making the best of the cards that we dealt ourselves. So we move forward on that front.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I would like just to take up a point that Alderman Holm mentioned in relation to the process, and on page 185 there was a meeting on the 30th of September 13, and that was for community consultation, and then on the 17th of March 2014 the council approved in principle the construction. What has happened since 2014 to 2017 has been basically three years. And then out of the blue, work started. What should have happened, Mr. Mayor, there should have been some consultation leading up to when the works actually started at the head of the canal, and that would have basically brought people together, and we could have avoided a lot of this misunderstanding that the community felt they were being sort of sidelined, if you want to use that term, and hence we had those meetings down there at the Lonsdale Canal, and it was quite robust in the extreme. So I think there needs to be a lesson learned here, and that is that we need to forewarn the community prior to when the works of this sort of nature are happening. And similarly in the case of the Kangaroo Bay one, we need to get the community involved prior to the decision being made or when the development application is being lodged. Seek council support.
Thank you, James. So the motion is for option, that we adopt option 2 and we move forward and authorise the general manager to write the community.
Mayor, I'd like to move the alternative motion that everybody should have on their
Do we have a second?
hope.
Alderman Cusick?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, we did say at a workshop that would remove the gym equipment from the park. Now, I attended as council's rep to the Lindisfarne Activity Centre, and I must say the committee were rather horrified. And all I'm trying to do tonight is reinstate the gym equipment. Now, when I say install or exercise equipment, should I be more specific, this is specially designed for seniors, but suitable for all ages. Now, why is it better at the Beltana Park than, say, Simmons Park, where there's already equipment there? Well, for a start, it's where the Lindisfarne Activity Centre is housed. And we all know that that's one of the most widely used halls in this city. Now the fact is there's jazzercise, there's yoga, there's karate, there's this and that. The people will use this. It's close to the elderly homes, one that's been built at Anchorage and others close by. Now and we talk about community consultation here tonight, 83% said they were in favour of the exercise equipment being there. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why we're trying to take it out when this is going to be staged over years. It's not going to be done in one hit. So it rather baffles me when the committee wants it, 83% of the respondents want it, and we're throwing it out. Now, I cut this out of a paper, and this is way before this came on the agenda. Fit for the elderly, playground equipment offers health gains for all ages. Now, in this council, we've got a positive ageing committee. Doesn't it look a bit ridiculous when we're trying to cut stuff out that those kind of people will use, that age group? So I'm asking Alderman to support my motion to get this back in. It's not going to be built in one go, and it's got to go through many budgets yet, but I certainly support this motion.
Yeah, I support this motion. I mean, it's not something that's going to break the bank. As Alderman Pearce has said, it's an area where senior citizens, senior people already congregate. They congregate in this vicinity, and I support the motion to put this equipment back in the plan.
A question, I think, rather than a speech. I would just like to know what's the difference between the type of equipment that we're talking about that's suitable for elderly and the equipment that's at Simmons Park already? I don't.
I can't actually answer in actual specifics on the type of actual machinery.
Or challenge? Yes. So it's probably a difficult question too, but the stuff that's at Simmons Park already would not be suitable. I guess I'm just trying to get a judge of why we would have, two sets of equipment relatively close to each other. Whether
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so the equipment at Simmons Park is similar to what...
it's more the Belgrave Beach.
And Belgrave Beach.
So it's more the...
So it was designed for people even using the foreshore trail equipment and continue on farm operation mobility. It wasn't for that.
I'm going to have to make a decision shortly, I know, but I thought when I came in I wasn't going to approve your motion, Alderman Pearce, because it's about rationalising resources and providing excellent facilities at Simmons Park, which could well be expanded to include this additional equipment. And based on the locality of the aged care, I can't see that this particular site's any closer than or further than Simmons Park. So I have a question for Mr. Graham in the sense that what type of funds need to be allocated to this type of equipment?
So what's the differential cost of this?
For instance, acting from memory, because I'd have the figures adjusted to take it out. But from memory, we
That's my next point. My next point, Mr. Graham, is it cheaper or less or more cost effective to put that same equipment at a flat Simmons Park than a slope at Beltana Park? Because you just mentioned it's the base work that's going to raise the cost of providing that equipment.
It's not necessarily the slope, it's the actual
type of
the foundation softball actually goes around the equipment rather than actually dealing.
So the softball or the conditions at Simmons Park are preferable to this particular site?
Exactly the same.
Oh.
And it's reclaimed land at Simmons Park.
Oh, okay. Okay. And a question through the chair to the General Manager, and Mr. Alderman Pearce may be able to answer this. There is a current dispute as to the location of that equipment on that master plan. Has that been resolved?
All right.
In right of reply? Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Earlier, before the meeting started, I was told to stay tuned for tonight's startling revelation, a bit like A Days of Our Life coming to the end to the following episode. And I've got to say, I feel a little bit let down, Mr. Mayor, as far as what was presented when this motion was moved. A couple of points. In the survey that went out, respondents didn't have the choice to say, would you like this equipment at Beltana Park, or do you think it's more relevant at Simmons Park? That was not part of the consultation, and it's a bit of lily gilding to suggest otherwise. Beltana Park is a fairly confined park. The other point I would make is that if you think about the major aged care and lifestyle facilities in this area, Freemasons and Queen Vic, Simmons Park is equidistant from that. Unlike Beltana Park, which has no toilet facilities whatsoever, not only does Simmons Park have those facilities, but they're being designed in such a way to cater for people with a big and variety of challenges when they're using such facilities, which is one of the many reasons why it's better at Simmons Park. The other point about this equipment is I think if we put this where it's proposed in Beltana Park, that is a real failure of lateral thinking and integration. Why do I say that? Because the idea and the concept of all abilities playground, something that I've been boring council with for coming towards a decade now, is people with a range of levels of ability can use the equipment next to each other. That is why you want this equipment co-located at Simmons Park as well, because within couples of any age spectrum, there can be different abilities and different levels, and that would allow someone that is able to use the current equipment at Simmons to a high level to keep using it while perhaps their partner can participate close by at the other one. As I said, all the other ancillary facilities are placed in Simmons Park. It is much more flatter and leveler than Beltana Park as well. I think it'll be a pretty easy case to fight for this equipment proceeding at Simmons Park when we come into the budgeting process, and I'd urge my fellow aldermen to think strongly about that. But when you come to your decision on the motion, the alternative motion that Alderman Pearce has made, think about really how Beltana Park is superior for this to Simmons, because for the life of me, it just doesn't make sense.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. The point that's been made by Alderman Walker is a valid one, in as much as that we have just under $2 million that's been spent on Simmons Park, and there are still other plans to extend that, and even a community garden has been mentioned in early framework in relation to Simmons Park. So the development of Simmons Park is not over Red Rover. It's still on the boil, and therefore it has become one of our regional parks, similar to what Bellreeve Beach Park is. It's a regional park, and Simmons Park is a regional park. And a regional park, for that purpose, incorporates toilets, carols by candlelight stadium, or a rostrum, and so on. It covers an ambit of different uses, and hence it has become the focal point of Lindisfarne and been accepted by the community as being number one, I might add, as far as a regional park is concerned within the city. So why do we need to go ahead and jazz up Beltana Park? Some years ago there was the talk about community park, community garden, and thank heavens we knocked that on the head, because there was an uproar from the community in relation to that. But having said that, the cost of this particular project in its stages, and it's been mentioned in stages, is of the order of $325,830, and of course it's going to be done in stages over time. I cannot support the actual money level in relation to this. However, because there has been identified a staging of this, and the Lindisfarne Rotary Club have contributed some funds for that early stage, which amounts to about $58,000 all up, of which there's only a top-up required because of the Rotary Club's contribution. So with that in mind, I've got no problems in supporting this first stage of the development, because down the track it will be judged on its merits, any future funding in other budgets. And who knows? Down the track, when it comes to budget estimates 2019, there may be a different viewpoint in relation to this, and I'll be making the same comment in relation to Alma when it's considered in the next couple of matters on the agenda. So I will support the officer's recommendation I will not support the amendment that's been moved, and if by any chance the motion that's before the chair is lost, I'll foreshadow the officer's recommendation.
Mr. Mayor, I would support the officer's recommendation, and the reason I'm giving for that is not because I don't believe there may be a case for the exercise equipment in the master plan, but it's on the point that Alderman James made, which is simply that this is not necessarily a fait accompli. There could be the option of, as we're staging the project, including it later, it's not a fait accompli, of course, if we support the officer's recommendation that we'd put the equipment at Symonds Park. It's something that I think I'd like to take through some more conversations with the community, some more consultation to see. We've had the feedback that's specifically on this plan. But the question, as Alderman Walker pointed out, was just about, do you want to see exercise equipment on this plan? And, often if you ask, would you like to see something, more people will say yes than no, when it's not put up as an alternative. But I think this is something that we might need to have some more community consultations, some more community conversations on, if we're putting it as an either-or proposition. To see what the feedback is on that either-or proposition and how much support there is for the different options. So on that basis, I won't be supporting Alderman Pearce's motion. Not that I'm saying there isn't necessarily a case for the exercise equipment in that park, but I just think it's something that we need to take a bit more time to consult and discuss with the community.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I think I'm fighting a losing battle, but I will have a go at this. Now, let's get this straight. We're spending roughly 80,000 to do this park up, and everything in there I agree with. And let's just get a few things straight. The age already congregate there. It's an activity centre, and of course, Currency Cafe just over the road has brought a lot more people there. This equipment is going to be more appropriate for the elderly, not like Symonds Park where it's for the younger set. The activity centre is always, they've got toilets there that can be made available. The library is open every single day, so those toilets are there every day. They can be, and we can make people more aware by having signage. Symonds Park is predominantly for young people. Now this activity centre is used 7 days a week. How many activities do we have at Symonds Park unless we promote it? How many do we actually have? No, we don't have any unless we promote it. So here, this centre, and let me say to the people here that the community centre raises funds to do the inside of the building. We try to do it as much as we can. And that's why we're trying to get this master plan going, because we want to have more functions. We had the carols at Christmas, which was a huge success, and we lit up the pavement number 4 there on your attachment 1 with Christmas lights. They looked really good. They really did. Now, I cannot understand why people are saying, no, we shouldn't have it. As I said before, we've got a positive ageing committee. We're trying to help people that are aged. This is a vocal point in Clarence. It's a great area in Lindisfarne. We talk about doing the bike park just across the road from it, and we're not saying anything about money there. But for this, we're saying, no, we're not going to worry about the elderly here. We have consulted on this. 83% said they want it, and tonight, are you going to say no? I'll be very disappointed if you do.
So the motion before the chair is Alderman Pearce's recommendation that we adopt the North Parliament Park Master Plan as is. All those in favour? The motion is lost. Alderman James.
The council support.
The officer's recommendation, second Alderman New.
Mr. Mayor, it can't go without counter this idea that this is ageist not to place his equipment here. That's just not on. It's about, if it's an alternative place, then Simmons will be the most superior place for it, hands down. And the reasons being, as noted, around the ancillary infrastructure, around the fact that it's flatter, around the fact that there's already equipment in place, so people with a range of backgrounds, ages and perspectives can all be playing and exercising in a similar place and not an isolated spot, and indeed a spot that doesn't have toilet facilities. It's all well and good to say just go into that hall. Is that open at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning? I'm pretty sure it isn't. So let's just go back to what the officers suggest. I personally don't think that the proposed lighting is required, but in the spirit of being magnanimous, I'm not going to fight that tooth and nail. Let's just start with this and get the process moving forward.
Other speakers?
In relation to providing exercise equipment which covers a whole spectrum of ages, I think it's a really positive thing to have the diversity of use in the one area. And the Lindisfarne Activity Centre is a magnificent site, and a lot of those activities occur within. There was some concern that if the exercise equipment was put in place, it would reduce the area for future usage of the open space in relation to carols and any other events they want to have there. So I'm all about providing points of excellence and not spreading it too thin. And I would love to see the amount of money that's been spent at Simmons Park be further enhanced by the inclusion of this diverse equipment for the other end of the spectrum. And it's a really healthy atmosphere when you've got all ages being able to utilise a space. I'm not against it. Obviously at Beltana Park, I'm disappointed if the committee feels really adamant about that, but we're not talking a huge difference. It's very healthy to walk from the Lindisfarne Activity Centre to Simmons Park. It's a lovely walking track. I don't see there's any impediment to using that equipment at that site.
Nothing under financial management, moving on to governance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'll second it.
That's quite all right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be brief. I'd just like to say the quarter report, as always, is a good guide to all of the things that happen throughout Clarence in the quarter. I would just like to highlight on page 17 the information on the requests for preliminary planning assessments and the huge increase that has been taking place in the requests for these assessments. Which goes really to something that we've all said, that this scheme is really complex and people find it very difficult to wade their way through. And I would just like to highlight at the Local Government Association meeting on Friday, Clarence actually has a motion for a review of the state planning provisions, particularly for the residential standards, which hopefully will result in some of this being slightly less opaque than it is at the moment. Thank you.
I'd like to ask questions. My first question is in relation to page 16 under the Bellerive Oval Transport Plan. The comment that's required, or the comments made here that there was one BBL game that required the implementation. My question through you to Mr. Graham, I think, is that does this apply to other activities other than football? In other words, if there was a athletic carnival which attracted 5,000 people to the Bellerive Beach quadrant. Does that automatically start the process of what is included in the Bellerive Oval transport plan?
Well, no, I think that's going to, for example,
I just would like, I would like to know if it's for other activities other than.
Through Mr Mayor, the mock has been initiated on anyone.
Thank you very much. So 4 users. Thank you. The second question is in relation to page number 30, and I'm hoping through you, Mr Mayor, Mr Vanderheck can help me out on this in relation to public places and permits bylaw review. When we had the proposal of mobile food vans come to council, is this a consideration under the review process, or is this entirely out of left field and not part and parcel of that? Please.
The draft bylaw for advertising expressly directed us to remove it on national competition policy grounds. So rather than continue to have the debate, we removed it for the time being, we'll proceed with the balance of the public places local law and continue the debate in relation to food bans outside of that particular approval process.
Thank you for that, Mr Mayor.
Just a supplementary, does this directly applicable to the Clarence City Council, or does it apply across the board? Because when I was down at Dun Alley on Saturday, I noticed there was a food van on the canal in direct competition to the salad and the Cray sausage and place on the other side of the road. And I thought, well, is there a difference between the Sorrel Council, because I think that's Sorrel Council in Dun Alley. Is that right? Well, we're on the, I might be wrong, but I thought Dun Alley was on the northern side of the canal is Sorrel.
The thrust of your question is, does the law apply down there? Every of the 29 councils in Tasmania has the capacity to implement bylaws for specific for certain purposes. It may be that the council down there doesn't have bylaws in place to govern that, or doesn't superintend them, but each council that has a bylaw is required to have it. It would automatically sunset after 10 years and they're required to renew it and review it. It is clear that there is a new direction coming out of the local government division in relation to the application of bylaws and the application of national competition policy. So I think you'll find that as all councils go to renew their bylaws for the varying range of matters that they cover, you will find that there will be further questions are raised, I suspect, by the rest of local government in relation to national competition policy and council trying to regulate
Any other speakers on what we report?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. when this was considered at the workshop, there were actually...
You moving the officer's recommendation?
I'm moving the officer's recommendation, Mr. Mayor. So when Mr. Mayor, this was presented at the workshop, there were two options that were put forward. One of those options were what was basically a compliance upgrade, where the bare minimum was done to comply with building and access requirements, etc. And then option 2, the enhancement project, then looks at the use of the facility and what the flows are through the building, and the idea is to actually configure the building in such a way that it becomes more functional in terms of the various uses that it gets. Now there was a little bit of a confusion in that the options were sort of looked at as the enhancement is an extension to option 1, the compliance option, which basically means you could do the compliance and then the enhancement later. But I think after a bit of discussion, some aldermen who had that understanding, I think now understand that actually that's not the case, because the way that the enhancement option reconfigures the building is such that certain works that would have been part of that compliance project would actually end up having to be demolished and redone elsewhere. So it's not a staged proposition. It is actually an either or. You cannot do both. You have to do one or the other. And I think if we did the bare minimum, while we would comply with various codes and regulations, we wouldn't be left with a building that really suits its purpose, that is functional in terms of the flows throughout the building, because of the way it's currently configured, and that's why I think we need to go with option 2.
I was just doing some calculations. I worked at council for 10 years. I've been gone for 7, and this place has been calling out for renovation upgrade, and I fully support option 2. To just bring it up to DDA compliance would probably not insult the people that have worked so hard within that centre, but it wouldn't give them an initiative and hope for progressing further and in the efforts that they have tried to do internally. And I think this is a wonderful outcome. That building is a beautiful building, and it has been not neglected, but it needs to be brought into the 20th century. And I think that has the potential to actually meet community needs. We've got pressure on Lindisfarne Activity Centre, we've got plenty of use at Howrah. This one sits right in the middle, and with enhancement and beautification and upgrading, it will attract a new clientele as well, and I think this should be definitely supported.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The discussion I had with Mr. Graham on Friday was along the lines that if we went ahead with enhancement and did stage 1, then that would overcome a lot of the DDA problems in relation to access the building from the car park and so on. But it's not clear in the recommendation, in my thinking, is that there's no staging of this, whereas it was under my impression that in my discussion on Friday was that the enhancement in stage 1 of option 2 was to basically fit the access and the toilet relocation, etc. But the recommendation that's before us is basically, all it says, determines the upgrade based on option 2, compliance works as its preferred option. And that's all. There's nothing in there to say that after stage one of the enhancement is done, then it's a matter for council to consider in future budgets as to whether enhancement stage 2 or enhancement stage 3 and so on, and then to the actual upgrade will proceed. And the council has budgeted and has set aside $300,000 or had set aside $300,000 in 2017 for design and some capital works. And that is waiting in the wings. That's to be utilised as part of this project. But the recommendation that's before us is basically, as the way I read it, is that option 2 enhancement is to go ahead, and the total cost is $800,000. There's no staging of this like it was in the Beltana Park. That did specify staging, and that's why I support it, because it would be under consideration in future budgets as to whether or not we go ahead and do the upgrade. So it's so open, and what's to say that if this motion is carried in its present form, that isn't it locking us in to a project that for future budgets? It doesn't say staging. It says option 2 enhancement, and that's $800,000. Why isn't there staging in this? Why isn't there staging, as in Beltana? I can't support it. If it had have said, right, let's do enhancements stage 1, which is the really important part of Alma, because at the moment it's not DDA compliant. We know that. Why don't we do that? And then consideration in budget number 2 in 1920, 2021, etc. Why don't we do that? What's so different from this project being staged and for consideration in future budgets as to Beltana? I cannot support this in its present form.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, anyone who's been to any events or at this centre understands the constraints that people are working under there, and it's amazing the number of events and people that actually take place there, given the way it's configured and the difficulties that I have there. We can all tell stories that we've heard about people getting stuck in doorways in walker frames because, it's as in Zimmer frames rather than walker, because it's not DDA compliant and it's just not suitable for the kind of people who are using it and the access that's required. I think it's very important that we actually do the enhancements along with the compliance, because as Alderman Hugh pointed out, it's silly to duplicate effort by putting some bits in and then having to take them out and redo it afterwards. One thing I would say though, if you look at the report, and particularly from page 252 onwards, the work that's done for the enhancements is actually broken up into stages. So there are whole 6 stages, one at a time, in the report from the whoever did the report, in the suggested report and the way that that's put together. That makes perfect sense. So it starts with some of the more critical ones and goes on through the rest of the enhancements. And in fact, the money that we've already put aside in the budget will do quite a lot of those stages right up front. So I think it's important we get on and do this. We give, as Alderman Thurley has said, respect to people who use this centre all the time and bring it up to date.
Yeah, I will be supporting it. And on the topic of stages and deciding as you go along whether you want to proceed or not proceed, it's a little different to Beltana Park, which is it's a greenfield site with some play equipment, versus the equivalent of this, which is building a house. You can't decide you're going to build a house, start the outside, and then decide if you want a kitchen in year 1 or not, and maybe the bathroom isn't a locked-in thing. There's certain things that will be there. There's core elements, and it's more complicated. And you do have to commit which isn't the sort of thing that can be left half pregnant or any other number of mixed metaphors that I could be using tonight. If you go down this path, there will be a conclusion, and when you make your decision on this item, it's about the value proposition. And when you look at the discussions to date, I believe this is the best value proposition versus a barely get there for now option, which is the alternative. A bigger spend, but a better value spend. So I'll be supporting it.
Mayor, look, I do agree, and I'm not having a crack at Alderman James, but you couldn't make it the day we went through it, and I sort of understand that once you actually get in there, you understand you've got to do more. Just stage a little bit, stage a little bit, stage a little bit. It really, I haven't been in there for years, but geez, Alderman Cholmon's right. I think it's very hard for a big bloke to even move around the toilet. Put someone on a frame or something like that. It's impossible. This site, if we're going to do it up, we've got to do it up totally, I'm afraid to say. And Mayor, if we have a budget bus trip, I want this to be on because I think everybody should go and have a look. It is very tight. Once you start moving one thing, you've got to move this thing and you've got to move that thing. And we all know it's not DDA compliant. I didn't know how bad it really was until I went up there and went through it. It is really bad. It really needs some attention. If we're keeping the thing, I think this is the only way to go and support option 2.
Yeah, and we spent $500,000 making it compliant and another not insignificant, but 260,000. We can get much greater, better functionality and a greatly improved facility. From that perspective, I think it's a no-brainer. But could I just ask, through you, Mr. the General Manager, 7.2, what happens, what is the effect of this recommendation if approved, if a future council doesn't approve any funding because it says in 7.2, its termination of preferred option does not predetermine council's budget commitment?
All council is doing tonight is signing off on a preferred option until you allocate money in a budget and still can't receive.
Thank you.
The motion specifies that option 2 is our preferred option. So it says that we will proceed in accordance with the plan outlined in the consultant's report that's referred to as option 2, and that plan is staged. And as Mr. Paul pointed out, the plan can only proceed as budget provisions are made for it. So I think it's fairly clear what we're doing here. We're saying we're commencing this project and we proceed as budget allocations are made. There's enough of a budget allocation to at least proceed with the first 3 stages. But I don't think we need to outline the staging in the motion because the motion is clearly referring to that consultant's report that specifies the staging. The project only proceeds as we can provide financially for it. That's something that we can do it at a pace that accords with whatever we decide through our future budget discussions. But it is, as Alderman Walker pointed out, one comprehensive project. It's not something that you can do a half of and then leave it.
Okay, so motion for
I find this really exciting, and the reason I find it really exciting is because with City Deals there's an emphasis on infrastructure, and it's also about funding coming from other levels of government, and so it's an effort to combine all 3 levels of government into producing some great economic outcomes for the community. And quite often there's a slightly different vision used and it enables us as a local community to get a bigger project or to actually be part of getting something that would be beyond our capacity to provide. So I really think this is exciting. It provides a clear sense at a practical level of getting infrastructure for your city, and I think we should support it. Obviously, we have discussed a strategic alliance backed by some legislation to create a stronger partnership between the four councils. This is an extension or a solidification of that attitude anyway, so I think we should do nothing but support this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to confess I find it faintly ludicrous, any suggestion that a city deal could work for Hobart without including Clarence, Glenorchy and Kingborough, because we are where the people live mostly who work in Hobart, and it just doesn't make any sense looking at transport or logistics or any kind of growth patterns without including all of us. And I think we should support this and have our say in what's going to happen in our greater Hobart region.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Alderman Thurley would recall, we went on a study tour to Auckland and we saw what an integrated approach to addressing a problem like traffic congestion, but doing it on a citywide basis can achieve, and that was achieved in that case through an amalgamation, and so they had a citywide approach to traffic management. No, I'm not suggesting, therefore, that amalgamation is the solution for Greater Hobart. We've already gone through that discussion, but the important thing is that it needs to be looked at on a citywide basis rather than the state government doing their thing and each council doing their own thing. Councils have a significant contribution to make, not just in our contribution to discussion about what should happen with state government infrastructure, but also we have our roles in the council arterial roads that we manage, the public transport infrastructure we put in place in terms of bus stops and maybe in the future ferry terminals and so on and so forth. And that's going to be one of the big challenges that the city deal is going to need to grapple with. Alderman Thurley said she's excited about it. I am excited about the idea of a city deal, but at the same time my excitement is tempered by a bit of realism, and that is that in the process of making the city deal, if we are going to have a citywide approach to issues like land planning, transport, etc., then some of the parties involved, state government, federal government, local government, are going to need to make compromises, are going to need to cede some power to what is in the greater good for the city of Hobart. And that's, the proof is going to be in the pudding. This is just kick-starting the process, but it will be interesting to see to what extent parties in this deal are willing to make those sacrifices, those compromises for the greater good. And particularly I'm thinking of the centre of our roads and our traffic infrastructure, Macquarie and Davey Streets. That something is going to have to happen there if we're going to solve our traffic congestion problems. And will the City of Hobart be willing to accept that? Time will tell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's good to indeed follow on from Alderman Hume, who, along with Alderman Thurley, spent some time in Auckland City. Normally, it's my gateway into a big rant about so many issues. Yeah, so that's right. However, I think it is really good to compare and contrast the city deal model with that, which is a lock solid shotgun merger where everything's brought in to some homogenised level with rating and all the issues and the moral hazard and that. What's good about this process is the overarching thing around land use planning and around transport, but still in a model that allows for competitive tension, as I've talked about before, the laboratories of democracy that are the different local government areas. The transport being improved it's a public good. It benefits all, not just those living in specific municipalities, and they're housebound. We have to travel through different areas to go along, so that's a really good thing, and same with the housing side of it. And yes, that means possibly ceding some power, but still keeping competitive tension about things around service levels, rating structures and all those things. So this is probably the best way forward. I feel like a bit of an expert on Macquarie Street. It took me 50 minutes to get home with my 2 kids in the back of the car today, so that was joyous. Didn't travel very far either on it. So yeah, look, I think this is what is the city deal and everything in it. The exact things I would go for? No. However, if you work an integrated process like this and you can get a good result, it means that there's more likely to be another time. So we're better to work on this and get some wins, even if they're not all the specific wins that we would want. I'll be supporting it.
The city deal will provide a framework to progress and advance the city as it grows, and at the same time try and make it more livable, so address transport issues. I see the only danger being a change of government at a federal level, because this is a pet love of Malcolm Turnbull, who loves city deals. And I hope that in any long-term plans in the city deal there is an ability to be able to say that whatever is proposed and whatever is developed does not get ignored once there's a change of government. And so that needs to be written in, that this is a long-term plan regardless of who's going to be in the federal seat. I can't see this as being anything but positive, because having different levels of government and having the input from the local government sector makes it a very realistic proposition. And the combining of funds, as I said before, which could normally not be achieved just at a local level and even at a state level, so combining the whole three makes for a good economic outcome.
Thank you. So the motion is the recommendation. All those in favour? Carried unanimously.
Thank you, Mayor. No, got my friends. Mayor, Mayor, are we actually having a bus trip? And if we are, I don't know if people want one. I've got about 4 things.
We love a bus trip.
No, I'm not saying a bus trip. There's about 4 things that I want to see, and I think we've got to make some decisions about certain things.
We have made a decision to have a bus trip for all this, and I just need some suggestions about what you do want to do.
The reason I haven't set a date yet is because until you actually do the first cut of your capital works program, I don't know what you want to look at, how much it entails, and how much time will be involved. Hence I haven't set a date as yet. We're having the first capital works workshop in a couple of weeks' time, I think, or towards the end of the month. We'll then set a date and set a program for you at that point.
So all of the things there we haven't done, and we start any.
I've already got a list of 2 or 3 things that you've raised with me. If anyone wants anything they want to visit, we'll take them on
I suspect the answer is no, but do we have any influence with the traffic light people and traffic light coordination? Example is, in the travelling on Cambridge Road towards Mornington, you've got Bayfield Street lights and Gordons Hill Road, and quite often the lights of Bayfield Street will be green and the lights of Gordons Hill Road red, so nothing moves. So why wouldn't they coordinate, have green and green every time?
Can we get our hands back?
The DSG has to change their traffic group, the traffic light group. I'm not too sure they've got a traffic comment, but it's something more than wire with them. Smart.
Yeah, I only have one question, which is I'd like to know what the progress is on the Kangaroo Bluff historic site due diligence process.
Through Mr Mayor, I believe the draft report's been finished and it's penciled in for the consultant coming on to talk to council on the 13th of March, which I think is the workshop. 13th of March, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I might have missed it, I will be honest. Do we have an update on the Cremorne decision of the tribunal, which was on the 14th? Do we have any information?
The answer I'm getting from Mr. Lodge is no, not yet.
Not yet. Okay. And my second question was Cambridge and the public open space at Cambridge. Do we have any update on that? Or is it?
Mr. Mayor, the report actually settled last week, and we're waiting on the decision.
Mr. Mayor, this piece of correspondence, which is the memo in relation to the Southern Cross care rates decision, I just wanted to know if anyone is aware of there's an appetite for appeal.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't know with any certainty whether there's going to be an appeal, but the advice from not the recommendation, the view of our legal advice is that it is likely.
Two questions. The next stage of the, let's call it the Boulevard Apartments in Kangaroo Bay, what is the process and procedures leading up to an official lodgement of a DA as per the statutory process?
Through Mr. Mayor, given that prior to any lodgement of a DA, the expression of interest process that we entered into as a council probably some 3 years ago now.
Question is in relation to the Director of Local Government's involvement with respect to the application by the Tasman and Sorell councils with the understanding of the possible merger or is there any possibility that there may be a lacking on their part an economic base, and is it possible for Clarence to be dragged into the mix as part of the financial and I suppose a prudent balance sheet which could be attractive to those parties concerned?
Well, I can start off.
No, not really, Mr. Mayor. The Minister has indicated consistently reference which he's given to the local governing board in relation to the Sorell Tasman reference could be perhaps widely interpreted. I would certainly be saying council, I think it's in council's interests to
their application or consideration of their application before the local government board could possibly go nowhere because of the viability of two councils and being able to make a go of it in that sense because of not having a sound economic or financial base.
There's certainly an argument put along those lines, and there's been a consequential argument that maybe they need, so. We're adopting as a council, and I think it's important that we put the arguments. The goal of developing Cambridge should be vast, so it's a matter of being possible. Move on and 30, second on John, all those in favour? Carried, against, I think that's carried unanimously, thank you.